My name is Ware Wendell. I'm the Executive Director of Texas Watch. For over 25 years, we have advocated for safety in this state, including patient safety. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for the early hearing on this bill. And I think it's especially fitting because this is Patient Safety Awareness Week, and this is a strong patient safety bill. Informed consent is very important. It deals with patient autonomy, and it really dates back to 1947 and the Nuremberg Code. I wanted to quote from that, and I know I'm on a clock, so I'll be quick. The person involved should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This is about respecting the individual and empowering them to make choices about their health care. Just for context, this panel currently has no public members, but the work of this panel is to serve the public, as you said, Representative Schofield, in informing them about the risks and complications for procedures. For context, the Texas Medical Board has 12 physicians and 7 public members. More than a third of the Texas Medical Board is represented by the public. And the Texas Board of Nursing has 13 members, of which 6 are nurses, 3 are faculty members, and 4 public members. So in a way, you can think of that as having 7 public members and 6 nurses. I do think it's very important to have physicians on this panel, and the bill does nothing to change the composition of the physicians. They still have a strong majority on this panel. It does nothing to change the number of attorneys on this either. It just says one of those attorneys needs to be board certified in health law. Mr. Chairman, I think of this as similar to what you've been doing with the judiciary and improving qualifications. And then one has worked on personal injury cases and is board certified there, so they can bring that patient's perspective. But really the most important thing this bill does is it gets some people inside of this process who are members of the public, so we can make sure that this language is in plain English, that people can actually understand and comprehend. It's a very modest bill. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your strong support of it last session. You will recall this bill got very deep into the process in the Senate and just died at the very end, Cassidy, on one of those last calendars. But it had a very good hearing in the Senate, and we hope to get it across the finish line this time.
The chair calls Lisa McGiffert with the Patient Safety Action Network. I've got you registered for the bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
I'm
go
for
ahead.
House Bill 923. Right place. I'm with the Patient Safety Action Network. We're a national coalition of volunteer patient advocates working to end medical harm. I've been a consumer advocate on health issues for over 30 years. As you've heard, this bill is about informed consent. It is one of the most important interactions that patients have with healthcare providers, and often one of the most confusing for patients. They're often given a laundry list of issues that they don't really have a lot of information about, and there's a lot of issues around delivery of informed consent, but there's also issues about the language that is included and how it's explained to patients. Probably everybody in this room has some experience with this. All we're asking, the main thing that we're asking today is that someone who's not a doctor and not a lawyer, but a public advocate who works in the public interest is on this panel to determine what those important discussions, sort of the tenor of those in discussions, how they communicate clearly to patients. Informed consent is well-established ethical and legal obligation for healthcare providers, and it's critical to patient autonomy and decision-making. Yet patients' recollection and understanding of medical procedures risk is very low, and we want to change that. Patient safety experts promote the concept that safe delivery of care is dependent on 2 things: patient engagement and clear, concise communication by their doctors in language that the patients can understand. Many invasive procedures have well understood quantifiable risks, and when the probability of those risks is well known, they should be communicated to the patients. Public members would ground the panel in thinking of what a reasonable person needs to know in order to be informed enough to do this medical decision-making. Public representation is routine in Texas, as where stated, the Sunset Commission in Texas has an across-the-board recommendation to include public members on state boards and committees, including panels like this one that are connected to an agency. This is not a new concept. Since 1990, FDA advisory committees that review complex scientific data about drugs and medical devices are required to include representatives of the public who are voting members. And the members of this Texas panel should be voting members just like all the rest of them. I urge you to support House Bill 923. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McGiffert. The chair recognizes Kay Van Way. Did I say that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I've got you registered here on behalf of yourself, testifying for House Bill 923. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Chairman Leach, Vice Chairman Johnson, and honorable members of the committee. My name is Kay Van Way, and for more than 40 years, although I hate to admit it, it's been that long, I've represented patients whose lives have been destroyed by preventable medical errors. I also serve as adjunct professor of law at SMU, Dedman School of Law, where I teach the course on law and medicine, which is medical malpractice. Alongside other attorneys, I played a pivotal role in the infamous Dr. Death cases, represented over a dozen of his victims, and assisted the prosecution with landing him life in prison. In addition to representing patients, I spend an inordinate amount of my time advocating for patient safety. Why? Because I'm a patient, and everyone that I love is a patient. One thing everyone in this room has in common, regardless of which side of the aisle we sit on, regardless of whether we are Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, is that every one of us is a patient, and everyone we love is a patient. So we probably have all ourselves been in the situation where we've had to undergo a medical procedure. And all of you will recall having that situation where, you know, you're naked and afraid, so to speak. You're stripped of all of your worldly belongings. You're in a paper gown, and the only thing that separates you from your fellow human is a little plastic wristband. And then the last thing that happens, you may or may not have been sedated. A nurse comes in with a clipboard and says, sign here, here, initial here, 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 here. This has become a perversion of what the long-standing law on informed consent was intended to be. For decades and centuries, the law has recognized that physicians have an obligation to explain the risks of the procedure so that when patients consent to procedures, they can do so in a truly informed manner. But what these documents have become are legal disclaimer documents. When you list death, for example, as a known risk and complication of every procedure, regardless of whether it's a bunionectomy or a brain surgery, the forms have become so cluttered with all of this information that it has become meaningless to the patient. It's meaningful for the healthcare providers because once they comply with the forms that are prescribed, then they get a legal presumption that they were not negligent in the delivery of informed consent. So patients need a voice. The members of the Texas Medical Disclosure Panel have a conflict of interest in the sense that they benefit, the more disclosures they put in there, the more they're protected. So thank you for your time. Let's do something to give patients a voice.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Van Way.
Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ware. Appreciate the testimony. Members, any questions for the witness? Representative Schofield.
Well, and again, the public members, which is the stated purpose of the bill, I think is a great idea. Again, and the personal injury trial lawyer language in here, that's not somebody certified in health law. That's somebody certified as a personal injury trial lawyer. To me, that kind of belies what I'm being told the bill's about. It doesn't seem to be about getting public members on there. It seems to be getting a trial lawyer on there, which makes the bill about suing doctors, not about getting appropriate health care for patients. So
Where is that the same language from last session, or is that new language?
That's the same language from last session, and one of the witnesses to my right can talk about
Let's
why
get
these
through the
public
panel,
members
and then
are
we'll come back around with questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
I have a question first for Mr. Wendell and Ms. McGiffert. Your testimony was basically that you wanted more members of the public on the board. If we were to remove the trial lawyer, would that make your organization less likely to support the bill? And I'll start with you, Ms. McGiffert.
We're not here to remove that balance between lawyers and physicians. We want to add 2 public members
And
of this committee. That's the main purpose
The
that
current
we have
law
brought
requires
this.
3 lawyers. This would just say one of them has to be a personal injury trial lawyer. If we still had 3 lawyers, but we added 2 members of the public, but didn't require a lawyer to be a trial lawyer, would
I
your-
understand, and I think that it's really important to have lawyers who have experience representing the patients. And right now, the lawyers on the panel do not have that experience. That's not what's on the panel. They represent
So you want a
medical.
trial lawyer?
I want someone who's represented patients' interest, yes.
And
I support the bill.
Mr. Wendell, I'm sorry, whichever it is.
I answered anything that starts or ends with starts with a W for my first and last name.
I have an H in the middle of my name that causes everybody to call it Schofield, and I try to take it out, and then they think I can't spell my own name, so.
I agree with Ms. McGiffert. I think the most important thing here is that we have different voices in this room so that we can get to language that the public and patients can understand. I will say, while it should not happen, doctor, it happened to me when I was young and didn't know better. I had surgery as a teenager, and I was under twilight anesthesia. They're wheeling me in on the gurney, and they give me the clipboard. And I initialed and signed, and I didn't have legal capacity, I guess, at that point, Mr. Chairman, but they shouldn't have given me the language at that time.
But I'm not sure that has anything to do with having a trial lawyer on this panel.
Well,
Whether it's a trial lawyer or not is not going to alter when they hand you the document.
I want to make sure that the language that gets to the patient
Right.
apprises them of the risks and complications of that procedure so they can make an informed choice.
I absolutely agree with you on
And
that.
so that's why I think it's important to have public members inside of this process. Honestly, Representative, I think 2 is low.
I agree with
I think we should have at least a third be public members if we could. And then of the lawyers, currently the lawyers on this panel, they represent the hospitals. And it's great to have somebody inside of the process who represents hospitals, but let's also have someone inside of the process who has represented patients. I think that's important. And then the board certification on health law also helps to improve those qualifications.
Again, I don't see that in here. I see a board certification in personal injury trial law.
I
one
believe
of
it
the-
also
the next
says health
Next
law.
one, okay,
Yes,
I see.
sir.
I got you. Let me tell you where I'm coming from on this. I came up here, I was dragged up here by then Governor Perry to work on the tort reform bill in 2003. And we had gotten to the point where the trial lawyers ran the practice of law. Doctors who had never had a claim filed against them were having 16, 17, 18% increases in their malpractice insurance to the point where they couldn't practice and they were leaving the profession. And it was injuring patients' ability to get a doctor. We'd gotten to the point where if you were south of San Antonio and had a problem pregnancy, there was no one who would see you for fear of all the lawsuits. I am not interested in putting the trial lawyers back in charge of the practice of medicine in this state. I do not want to go back to where we were. We've gotten to a much better place in our state in the provision of healthcare law, of healthcare, and I'm not interested in having the trial lawyers run the show anymore. And I'll ask that as a question to Ms. Van Way, because you clearly want to comment on it.
May I say one quick thing to make sure we have a
Yeah,
clean
quickly.
record? I can't remember, Mr. Chairman, if I said I'm in support of the bill. I am in support of the bill. Ware Wendell with Texas Watch.
Yeah, you're on the yes, I got you on the record. Ms. Van Way.
Yes, thank you, Representative Schofield. The term trial lawyer has a negative connotation to some people. What we're really talking about here are medical malpractice lawyers, and no one wants to have anything to do with us until they need us, and then we're not such bad people. Now, I need to explain something. The Texas Board of Legal Specialization does not have a board certification for medical malpractice lawyers. Healthcare lawyers typically represent healthcare corporations in legal and regulatory matters. Medical malpractice lawyers, if they're board certified, are board certified in the general personal injury field. That's comprised of both plaintiff and defense lawyers. There's a very small subset of those that regularly represent patients. But I think the thing that's important to understand is that there is no mechanism that I can conceive of where any lawyer or any member of the committee could expand the rights of plaintiffs. This is literally only about having the voice of someone, not me, but someone who regularly represents patients and understands their experience with informed consent to have a voice. So the committee has no power to give more rights to patients or take rights away from
But
doctors.
you would be writing the language that the patient's receiving from a trial lawyer perspective, which is not to me, is not the perspective I'm interested when the provision of health care is at issue. And I understand what you're saying, and believe me, I've had this debate for a quarter century. I'm a hell of a lot older than I was when I came up here. And I get what you're saying, but to me, and I only have one vote, that's just not the direction I want to go. And I would rather have another public member who has dealt with patients, who has been a patient, who knows what it's like to be on the other side of that table, than to put one of us up there and have another trial lawyer.
Members, other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Hayes.
I'm not sure who would have the data, but how many lawyers in Texas are board certified in personal injury trial law, and how many are board certified in health law?
That information is obtainable, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Representative, I don't want to misquote anything, but I think it's less than 1% of attorneys, but we can pull that information and get it to the committee for you.
Yeah, my question there was, I think there's a decent number who are board certified in personal injury, but I'm not as familiar with health law, and I didn't know if we were making the pool of eligible participants too small, because only 7% of all lawyers are board certified in anything, but we have about 30 different things to be board certified in, and each of those have generally less than 1% of practicing lawyers. And especially, I would think not that many people practice health law, or at least board certified. There's a lot of people might practice in the law, they just may not be board certified in that particular area. Any thoughts on whether that's too narrow? Should it be board certified in health law or practice in health law for X years, or?
Well, I may, if my memory is correct, in prior sessions, when we've talked about this bill, members of this committee have raised, I think we had something more general, lawyers who represent patients, and they wanted something more specific, and then we came up with this language. So I think that's where the language came from, because a committee member thought it was a little bit too broad to say lawyers who represent patients.
Members, other questions? Okay. Okay, thank you. Appreciate your
Thank you.
testimony.